Welcome to another edition of Bills by the Numbers, where we let the stats tell you where the Bills are at. We're presented by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Coming up, while the Bills search for a new head coach, we examine the areas in need of improvement for Buffalo's roster. Will the Bills' current roster impact the coaching candidate they ultimately hire in an effort to minimize change? And we'll have our one burning question. Let's get the offseason train rolling. Glad to have you with us here on Bills by the Numbers. He's Bills Wall of Famer Steve Tasker. I'm Bills play-by-play man Chris Brown. And with another season over a bit too soon, we focus on Buffalo's roster and where it didn't reach its full potential. Now, the Bills were still a very successful team, as we know, 12-5 record, 4th in total offense, 7th in total defense. But in the postseason, as we know, they didn't play their best, but also may have not had all the answers. Buffalo, like many teams, even those in the playoffs this year, had their share of flaws, and that's where we begin. What part of this team sits at the top of the list in terms of fortifying or in need of fortification going forward and improving with personnel?
Well, with the situation, the contracts and the cap and all of that stuff, obviously there's a couple of spots. You're losing 2 starting offensive linemen. One of the things that has been,
to free agency,
to free, kind of foundational for the success of the offense. To me, that's where you start. I know the wide receiver they're gonna fill out the roster with wide receivers and all that, but this offense, as you said, 4th in total offense with a revolving door and an absolute mess at wide receiver. Don't let what's good about it go. You've got the number 4 offense in the league. Keep it there at least. And then anything you can add on the outside at wide receiver will be gravy. Your tight ends are still in the room. Khalil Shakir's still under contract. James Cook just signed an extension. So don't let the offensive line erode because whether you've got, a Hall of Fame wide receiver out there or not, Josh is going to be running for his life before he can get the ball there. You've got to start with the foundation, and you can't lose that. To me, it starts and ends with the offensive line on offense, and the same thing on the defense. They've still got to bolster the defense and try and find a pass rush.
Yeah, looking at the offense, I would tend to agree with that. How they decide financially to refortify the line, whether by re-signing their own or by promoting from within with maybe a young player in the pipeline at one of the spots and maybe only re-sign one of the two, those being Connor McGovern and David Edwards, remains to be seen. And, once again, the Bills have to get under the cap first and then decide if they're going to make some other fiscal decisions to create more cap space, be it restructure, be it outright release, whatever the case might be. But I don't think there's any getting around the fact that the receiver production, due partially to injury and to other factors, was not there. The interesting thing is, if you look at the numbers, and that's what we do here, they weren't that far off from last year. So here are the receiver totals, 2024 compared to 2025. By receivers only. We're not talking tight ends. We're not talking backs here. So in 2024, the receivers had 190 receptions. This past season, 180. So 10 fewer catches by the receiving corps in total. Yards, 2024, 2,400. This year, 2,107. So about a 300-yard difference there, down. And then receiving touchdowns, 17 in 2024, just 11 this year. They did have one rushing touchdown from Elijah Moore in Week 2 against the Jets.
Is this total regular season and playoffs?
This is regular season only. Right. So the production was down, but not dramatically down, maybe with the exception of yards.
And I think, too, one of the things that we always notice here, particularly with this crew and in the era that we were in, with Josh, you see it on the field, these small, subtle differences. There are moments in the games where you're missing the X guy, that big time guy. Not
Yeah.
all the time, because they get good production from the tight ends and the running backs, and the running game was a huge factor this year. We
Yep.
led the league in rushing, the whole thing. But there's no doubt that every so often you're looking for some receiver that, it's about, he needs a target. They didn't have that this year. Khalil Shakir was very late to the party this year and starting to get it. You saw it in the playoffs where he got 12 of 12 in the wild card round.
Another 7 catches
and
against Denver.
And another 7 against Denver. So he emerged, at the time when it was the most important. But during the regular season, and at the time when this team kicked it off in week 1 with a chance or designs on getting the 1 seed, those small margins become big differences.
I think at the end of the day, the NFL is a matchup league. And I think in the regular season, you can overcome maybe some one-on-one matchup deficiencies at the skill positions and still find a way to win the game, especially if you have the number one.
Bills did.
Especially if you have the number 1 rushing offense in football. And yes, that's what the Bills did. When you get to the playoffs and you're playing against the best defenses in the league, not to mention the fact that the Bills in succession faced the number 1 run defense and the number 2 run defense in football, that's the point where maybe you need to be able to pivot and have a winning matchup or two in the passing game.
Yeah.
And I think on the outside, on the perimeter, that hasn't materialized yet. Whether you thought a young player like Keon Coleman was going to step into that role, or whether you did not acquire maybe the right free agent to step into that role. Now, Joshua Palmer was on IR by the time they got to the postseason, but Joshua Palmer did not have a single receiving touchdown this season.
Yeah.
Not one. For a $10 million a year receiver, I think the expectations were significantly higher than that. I think
what
that's
gets
fair to
lost
say.
in this when you look at the schematics and the X's and O's and what it means in the big picture when you've got a big time X receiver? Yeah, certainly there's a guy that you can go to and throw it to, but more than that, it forces a defense to play you a certain way. The defense is not going to one-on-one him with just a guy.
Mm-hmm.
They've got to put their number 1 corner on him. And then and give him some help in certain situations. A big X receiver, you're going to double team him all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And some teams will double team him with your number 2 corner and help. So hopefully those 2 guys are good enough to stop your number 1 guy. And then our number 1 guy is really good enough to stop your number 2 guy. So then that's how a defense attacks your personnel.
Yeah. And it's a trickle-down effect.
Right. So if you've got a guy that can't be covered, or is harder to cover, the amount of assets and attention a guy gets from a defense affects how good everybody else can play. Mm-hmm. And where all of a sudden your number 1 rushing offense becomes unstoppable because the defense will not take 2 guys off that guy, and they're stopping you with 7 guys in the box instead of 8 or 9 because you got 2 guys or 2.5 guys watching the X guy. That's the problem that a big-time wideout gives you because he's out there by himself, and you got to throw guys outside the box to go cover him.
Yeah.
Or move guys or stem guys after the snap. That's what gets lost in all this. It's not just about throwing at the guy 10 times a game. It's about what a defense has to do
Just
to
because
cover
he's
him
on the
up,
field.
just because he's there, and
Yeah.
the fear he strikes into their coaching staff.
In case you were wondering where the passing game production went, it largely went to the tight ends. 2024, 72 receptions for 800 total yards and 4 receiving touchdowns by the tight ends in 2024. This past season, 2025, receptions went up by 23, 95 receptions, and the yardage went up by more than 400 yards, from 800 to 1,210. And then here's where the big spike happened. Receiving touchdowns, they went from 4 in 2024 to 12 this past season. The 3 tight ends on this roster outscored the receivers, of which numbered about 8 by the time you had guys shuffling in and out of the lineup. 12 receiving touchdowns for the 3 tight ends, 11 receiving touchdowns for the entire receiving corps this season.
And I think that number was probably exacerbated by the fact that the coaching staff getting ready for games knew the tight ends were going to be there.
Yeah.
They knew they were going to be in the lineup.
That's a part of it.
And a week to week, they didn't know if this guy with Palmer was in, and you go all the way back to all the guys that were here. Elijah Moore was going. They didn't know who these guys were going to be in, and so they knew the tight ends were going to be there, so they planned for it, and the production was there. That doesn't surprise me either.
Yeah. It looked that way to the naked eye,
it
just
did.
thinking about it without even consulting the numbers. In case you were wondering where the running backs went in the receiving game, they were largely flat from 24 to 25, 67 receptions in 24, 69 this year, 731 yards last year, 664 yards this year, 8 touchdowns receiving last year, 6 this year. So relatively the same, and it makes sense. You had the same 3 guys to a large degree with Cook, Johnson, and Davis. Part 2, for where we'd like to see improvement, you mentioned the defensive line. Pass rush is a problem, and it's been a persistent problem for this team in terms of having a difference maker off the edge that other teams, to your point about an X receiver, game plan for. And we look at the pass rush totals quickly before we dive into this conversation. 2024, 39 sacks, ranked 18th in the league. This year, 36 sacks, ranked 20th in the league. Where they've been strong is passer rating allowed, and you got to credit the guys on the back end for this too, obviously. 18th in passer rating allowed in 24. Passer rating was 93.3 for opposing quarterbacks. This year, 7th in the league in passer rating allowed, 79.8 passer rating. Pass pressure percentage, 10th in 2024, 11th in 2025. Then you have quarterback knockdown percentage, largely the same, 13th in 2024. It was 8th this year, although it only went up 1.5%. Hurry percentage, 7th in 2024, 20th in 2025. And then completion percentage allowed, that improved to a great degree. Completion percentage allowed in 24, they were 28th, 68.5%. 2025, 4th, 59.7%. Big jump there.
That was a big jump. You could feel that.
Yeah, and then QB hits, 16th in 2024 with 94, 20th this year with 92. What is it's been an elusive problem for the Bills to solve and fix. It's not like they have not tried. I mean, they've tried year over year over year to address it. And this past offseason, they signed 3 defensive linemen in free agency and drafted 3 defensive linemen in the draft class, although not all of them were edge rushers. There were defensive tackles, obviously drafted and signed in free agency. But if you look at it, Michael Hoyt, not really a part of the equation, played a game and a half, and that was it. Joey Bosa, after he injured his wrist, was a non-factor the rest of the season, playing through that. And to your point about free agency, on the offensive line, you've got Bosa and A.J. Epinesa as free agents. So you'll have presumably some subtraction there. The problem here, I see it, Steve, is sure you could get a tier 2 free agent to sign here. I think you have to invest in the draft here and find a way to get elite pass rushing talent, even if you need to trade up in round 1 where the Bills are picking 25th. I know the draft is a long way off, but
you're right. The problem is those guys that can really rush the passer, that have those double-digit sack year after year after year. Obviously the Myles Garrett's of the world and the Max Crosby. Although Max Crosby was a lower round draft pick, they're 1%ers.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to have elite physical traits. You got to be big, tall, long, fast, strong, athletic, all of that, and you've got to have something between your ears. Those guys are hard to find. The Bills you're not going to get one of those guys in free agency because teams will not let them go.
And
you
their
could
cost
possibly
prohibitive.
Yes, you could possibly trade for one, but your cap is going to be out of whack if you do. And the only way to get one is high in the NFL, not just a first rounder. I'm talking in the first 10 picks of the first round,
15
at least
minimum.
15 maybe. you've got to get in the top half of the first round, and there has to be a guy there.
Well, yes.
There has to be a guy. There's not going to be 6 of them. There's going to be 2, maybe 2, 3 possibly.
Yeah. I'm not going to pretend to have looked at the draft class yet. But
Well, historically speaking,
right.
It's not going to be a handful. It's not going to be a handful. So you've got to go up and get one if you want one of those like that.
Yeah, because here's what I come back to. We heard Brandon Beane in his press conference this past week when he talked about tweaking the roster and upgrading it, and he was explaining how when you're paying a quarterback top of the market money, which they are obviously with Josh Allen, you have to make sacrifices elsewhere. In my estimation, with as hard as they have been chasing improving the pass rush, I think the formula and the sacrifice you have to make is draft capital. I think you have to sacrifice draft capital and maybe significant draft capital to get to a place where you can get a premier pass rusher in the draft, because to me, that's the only way you're going to get elite talent at a price you can afford.
Right.
So cough up and sacrifice draft capital to acquire the elite talent you need on your defensive line to change the fortunes of your pass rush productivity. What do you say to that?
Yeah, absolutely. You can sacrifice it to get it if the guy's if you feel he's a sure thing, sure.
You have to be over the moon about the talent that you can potentially acquire.
Is lean, and because Josh is on the team, they are lean heavily on drafting on the defensive side of the ball. They did this last year, and when they draft on the offensive side of the ball, it's much easier to draft big dudes up top, in the draft for the offensive line, say. But I think they have spent some draft capital at least on the defensive secondary, trying to bolster the defensive pass rush by covering guys up a little better.
Right.
Cole Bishop, Max Hairston, just to name a few. Christian Benford. They have sprinkled draft
Jordan
picks.
Hancock.
Jordan Hancock, and of course Taryn was a long time ago draft pick. But that's kind of where they go if they can keep those guys top notch.
Because small guys are more plentiful in number.
Athletes are a dime a dozen. Not all of them can play football, but you get a guy that's a good enough athlete for sure in the draft.
Yeah.
And that's where they've been able to draft and develop guys.
Knowing the Bills still have some work to do to get under the cap, do you envision more of the best new talent added to the roster this coming offseason coming to this team via the draft?
The best new talent? Probably not, no. You can't count on that because they're young. You don't know how they're going to adapt. There's a lot more question marks than there are if you sign free agents on the open market who are proven. Certainly, it did not turn out that way this last year with the free agent market and wide receivers. Of course, all those guys got nicked up and they were sidelined in and out of the lineup. It turned into a revolving door. It's kind of a mess because of the health aspect of the roster. But for the most part, you kind of know what you're getting in some of these guys. Mm-hmm. And this crew with Brandon and their scouting, they've done a really nice job at finding guys who emerge in Buffalo's system much better than they have appeared other places, particularly on the defensive side of the ball. Deion Walker was a guy they drafted last year who fell
fourth round,
and he was as good and as consistent as defensive tackles the Bills had on their roster last year. And he
made some all rookie teams this year.
He was a really good player and had a very good season. And you got to have high hopes for him going forward.
Yep,
stuff like that is in the mix.
I do think though that at important, high-priced positions, like edge rusher, like wide receiver, where the Bills aren't going to be able to pay a premium in free agency because of their cap situation to improve those positions, those have to be acquired in the draft. So I think, look, we know Brandon Beane and how he operates. He tries to fill as many of the perceived positional holes as best he can in free agency so he doesn't feel backed into a corner in the draft when he's on the clock because there's a glaring positional need. That's how he's operated. But knowing that he's going to be under some measure of financial constraints. I think he's going to choose to fill some of the lower-priced position holes in free agency, and maybe not to the same degree positions like edge, receiver, corner, that are high-priced positions that right now you can't spend a premium at those spots because of your cap situation and all the money you're paying Josh. You got to hit it out of the park in the draft at those spots. And to our point earlier, you probably have to move up the board to get a premier edge rusher. You can probably find a quality receiver somewhere. It's a good receiver draft this year.
You get up to the middle of the first, you're going to get a good wide out. The middle of the first is a hit and miss whether you can find a defensive playmaker that's a difference maker.
Knowing cap space, Steve, could limit free agent spending. Do you believe their coaching search could or would prioritize choosing a coach who might change the least scheme-wise so as not to create more work and potentially more cost in getting the roster fits necessary to fit scheme changes?
It's a really good question. I don't think it will affect their decision about the head coach. It'll be a consideration, and it'll be a factor going forward. But if they feel like they've got the right head coach, they won't care what his philosophy is. That's something you can adjust to on the fly. I think that's a secondary consideration. I don't think it would affect the decision of getting the right guy.
I would tend to agree. It's not the top priority. I will say this, though. Let's say, and this is just purely a hypothetical, the only way I could see something like that coming into play is if they're down to two candidates and they are razor thin. The difference between them is negligible. And one of them would create less disruption to scheme and personnel. I think that might tip the scale in favor of one over the other. But that's only if you have two guys that are dead even.
It's hard for me to envision two candidates being that close.
Right.
Being that close would probably mean there's a larger difference than just scheme. Because you'll have guys, we know who the handful of people are making the decision for the Bills.
Yep.
Terry, Brandon, Josh, me, gang, the whole gang is going to be in there. The guys making that decision there'll probably be some pushback on both sides about which guy they should take, and that's going to be the more.
And to your point, the most important thing is to get the right leader for the team. If the schemes have to change, the schemes have to change. We transition to the numbers game where Steve will be quizzed on off-season acquisition activity. Here we go. Question number one, Steve, and we go to the very near past, so we're not digging too deep into history here. Question one, if you had to guess, how many unrestricted free agents did the Bills sign last offseason that were new to the roster? Give me a number.
To the 90-man roster at training camp?
Yeah, March, April signings.
All right.
Unrestricted
15.
free agent. You're close. It's a little bit lower than that. It's 11.
Okay.
So you're in the ballpark. All right, not bad. Question number two.
I'll take that as a half a win.
I'll give you a half point for that, sure. How many Bills free agents were re-signed back to the roster last offseason?
Oh, that's a good one. I'm going to say between 5 and 8.
It's exactly 5.
Okay.
5. Well done, Steve.
There we go.
Question number 3. How many Bills players were signed to extensions last offseason?
I'll say.
Remember, it was the offseason of extensions.
Oh. Does a restructure count as an extension?
No. We're looking for new deal, like long-term.
I'm just going to say 4.
You're right there, Steve. It was 5.
I'm taking that one, too.
Josh Allen, Christian Benford, Terrell Bernard, Khalil Shakir, Greg Rousseau. Question number 4. Who was Buffalo's most expensive free agent signing last offseason?
Mike Hoyt.
It was not Michael.
Palmer?
It was Joshua Palmer.
There you go.
3 years, $30 million. So, pretty good job there, Steve, in the numbers game. Well done.
I was right around it. Yeah,
You were all over it.
That's a win for me.
Bills fans, get in on the action with FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Just download the app today to play any way you want. Plus, with live betting, you'll get updated odds on games that have already started. Best of all, you get paid your winnings fast. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the Buffalo Bills. Time now for our one burning question. Do you foresee the Bills going young, hotshot, first-time head coach when they find their guy? Or do you think it will be a veteran candidate who has been a head coach before?
That's a really good question. I think this head coach, the next one, is going to have to convince the brass here that they can get it done and get it done in the next 2 or 3 years, like right real quick. I think that's the window. The expectations are through the roof.
All right.
So if it's a young hotshot guy, okay, but it's a huge plus because you think you get a 31, 32, or 30-something guy here, he can be here for a long time. And the older guy, if it's an older former head coach, you would think there'd be less of a learning curve and that kind of thing, and he would have a plan and say, listen, we need to do this and this and this, get that in place, and let's go. Less of a startup. That's the question. A young guy's going to have to convince a lot of people that he's going to hit the ground running. An older coach, that will be part of the deal. That'll be understood that he can do that. And I think this head coach needs to hit it hard and hit it well early.
Oh, yeah, because the expectations are enormous, maybe higher than any other team with an open coaching
There's a clock
job.
ticking on the quarterback now. I mean, he's going to be going into his 9th year. He's got another half a dozen years left. But one Super Bowl, awesome. How about 3?
Well, right.
Let's not just. I know that just one before we die, all of that stuff. But this is let's go. Find the right guy and keep going.
Right. I think ultimately the right guy is the right guy, whether it's young, up-and-coming, promising young coach who hasn't been a head coach before. I mean, that's what the Bills did the last time with Sean McDermott. Or maybe it is a guy that has been there and done that and will spend less time growing into a head coaching role because he's been one before and spend more time getting this team over the top, from a leadership perspective.
And I'm not that caught up in young guy. I'm biased. They hired my head coach when I played. He was 59 at the time.
Yeah.
So, or 60 at the time.
As we know, NFL history has told us there are many different ways to skin the cat and have a successful coach
the right
in
guy's
place.
the right guy.
Yep.
And I think we'll know. We'll know quick after this thing kicks off if he's the right guy. We'll find out in the offseason. We're going to get an idea of it. And that part of it's always fun. The part we've been through over the past week or two is not fun.
No. Our closing figure examines Buffalo's previous head coaching hires. As we know, Sean McDermott coached the Bills for 9 seasons and was a first-time head coach when he was hired by Buffalo. Of the previous 7 head coaching hires by Buffalo, 3 were first-time head coaches at the NFL level, while 4 had been NFL head coaches prior to being hired by the Bills. It's almost split right down the middle, and I think we would agree this one could go either way as well. Because they've had
the most successful one had never done it before.
Yeah, there are young ones in the pool, and there are some veteran ones in the pool.
Don't forget, you get this guy. There are guys out there. I don't know who they are. I don't have an idea. But they hired the last guy. Nobody knew who Sean McDermott was. He came in and bang, right away. So there's some of that going on here. This team is not that team.
Nope.
And so what it would take to get it
The requirements might
not
be
only
different.
to earn their quick respect and to say, come in and step and be the leader and step in to do a role that McDermott left a big void
Yep.
for this. You saw it. That's the challenge to me, plus the football side of it.
Yeah.
So you got to have that's a big job.
Yeah. The
That's a big
2017 team was just looking for focused, defined vision and leadership. I think this team is looking for a difference maker that can help them take the next step.
I'll say this as well. It's one of the things that I have noticed when good coaches, guys who know what they're doing, step in and they take up and they say, okay, here we go. And they get in, they start to get to know their players, and they start to find out who they are and who's the building and understand what their team personality is and and all that. You will always see, like we did with the Bills when McDermott took over, and you can look around to other franchises. There will be some surprising players that are jettisoned.
Well, we saw it here under McDermott. We
That's
saw
right.
Sammy Watkins and Ronald Darby, their top 2 picks in the 14 and 15 drafts,
And the left tackle.
get traded away.
Cordy Glenn.
And Cordy Glenn for the 2018 draft a year later. Yeah.
Others, that's one of the things a head coach they do, not because they just want to make. It's not a statement move. It is a personality and a you're not doing enough move.
It's the right guys on the bus move.
That's right.
Want the right guys on the bus.
You want the right guys on the bus, and there's always a little bit of that. Now, this is a different situation, so it might not be that stark.
I don't think it'll be that severe.
Even going into the 17th season, when Darby and Watkins, that was right before the season. That was
training
startling.
camp. Yeah.
They weren't the right guys, and that's a team that got to the playoffs.
That's all for this edition. Be sure to subscribe on whatever podcast platform you use so you know when the next episode is out. Because when you need to know about the Bills, you need to check Bills by the Numbers. For Steve Tasker, I'm Chris Brown. Thanks for listening. We'll catch you next time, everybody.